All right, well, good morning, everybody. This is Jason Elmore, and welcome to this DMH Technology Summit session. We have with us Cameron Kempson, the director of Shift, and she'll be talking about exploring technology and how to define and have the conversation. Just a couple of things before we get started here. Just want to mention that Missouri APSI, which is the Association of People Supporting Employment First, they're committing their annual professional development one-day training to assistive technology. So that is happening on March 24th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. in Jeff City. And there is a flyer with information, and that can be found on the DMHDD website under the Technology First page, and just click on the events button. You can find that information there. Also, there is a link to a survey on the Technology Summit page. If you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to fill that out, we'd greatly appreciate your feedback on the Technology Summit this year, and it will help us to improve it next year. Just a reminder that this session will be recorded, and we're asking that if you have any questions, just please put them in the chat or save them until the end, and hopefully those questions will be answered as time permits. All right, other than that, Cameron, welcome.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate it. So good to be here today. So my name is Cameron Kempson. I'm the director of Shift, which is a national education and accreditation platform in technology first. And so our goal really is to create some national opportunities for accessible and affordable education to help everyone in all layers of the organization and in state agencies really begin to make that culture shift into what it means to be tech first. But I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about communication and how do we start communicating about technologies, remote support, and all geared around independence and self-determination. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. I am a really casual speaker, so but I understand we're going to put questions in the chat box and then I'll answer those at the end. All right. And I do really want to take a minute before we get going to thank Missouri, not only for all the work they're doing in the tech first field, but also for hosting opportunities like this so that people can have an opportunity to really connect with each other and learn more about technology and whatnot. So thanks for having me here today. All right, today the crucial conversation we're going to have is how do we talk about technology? One of the things that George Bernard Shaw said was the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion it has taken place. I have a colleague at work who has had this posted on her bulletin board right as you come into her office for a long time, because as we know, a lot of times we believe we've communicated with each other, and then we find out after the fact that it was either in our head or what we said may have been misinterpreted or miscommunicated, or we left out some important details. And so my goal today is to help us really come to appreciate the way to have effective communication around the implementation of technology, so that we can engage in really open and authentic conversations, but also prepare everyone for what's going to happen or for updating them on what is happening. So sorry, goodness, hit that a little too hard. So why are we calling it a critical conversation? It's critical because when we are moving forward with a new type of culture or programming or new operational situations, then we need to have that buy-in, not only from those in the direct support team, but really everyone at all levels of the organization. And also, if we're talking about something like the Tech First movement, we need buy-in at the state level as well. And so it's one thing to say that you are tech first, but it's another thing to really indicate that you're technology first by having everyone in your organization, or for the most part, most people in your organization, buying into that culture, applying new skills, using the knowledge that they've gained, and really integrating technology in a way that is creating opportunity for independence. We know that when there is communication transparency, that helps us earn the trust of those around us, not only those that we may be supervising, but also those that work right next to us at the table or in the office, whatnot. One thing that I've seen over time when I used to consult organizations who were beginning this technology integration piece um, was that there wouldn't be a lot of communication, not because they didn't want to tell their staff what was going on, but because they were afraid if they offered too much communication, that it would overwhelm people. But yet what they found was by not communicating or not offering communication in small bits all along, that it really created a lot of anxiety for staff. And so being transparent from the very beginning is important. And then finally, as we know, communication is critical for preparation and planning. Whether you are already using technologies as solutions or you're headed in that direction, or maybe right now you're just exploring what that would mean for your organization. Preparation and planning have to take place in order to get ready to either make a change or enhance what's already in existence. And so having that time to talk with each other, to learn from other stakeholders like the self-advocates, the families, to listen to staff, and then bring all that information in and really prepare and plan for your next steps is going to be really where you need to start. And the goal of this is to make sure that everyone in this process feels welcome at the table. So some considerations to think about as you're having these conversations. The key one that I highlight when I talk with folks is this idea of a common language. And in just a minute, we're going to go through some terminology that should be a part of that common language. What I tell people is that when you do come around that table to have those discussions, people bring their own perceptions, their own attitudes, their own experiences, and their own knowledge. And so having that time to, or that those words and that terminology to really keep the team on focus and on point with what you're trying to accomplish is going to be crucial. It's important to be honest and authentic. I know sometimes we don't want to hurt people's feelings, or sometimes honesty and authenticity can come off as being really overbearing. So we try to find a delicate balance in how do we communicate things honestly and openly, but in a way that is still inviting to everyone and is a part of that listen and learn process, which is the last one on this list. We'll talk about that in a minute. You really need to have a clear message, which means that those of you who are either starting to move in the direction of technology first or are there and then adding on and doing some new things, having a clear message is going to be critical to those initial phases of communication. You want to make sure that everyone has, who's going to be doing the primary communicating, has an understanding of that clear message, and that you're being consistent in the way that you share that. It can be again, it can create a lot of anxiety if people are hearing different messages from different people. The information that you're sharing needs to be timely and relevant. So if you are talking about becoming technology first or moving into another phase of technology first, or if you're just exploring what does it mean to be tech first, you need to be drawing on information that's both timely and relevant, and that means something to the people that you're talking with. So using examples and success stories, or referring to other programs that are already implementing some things that you're getting ready to try out, those are going to be ways that you build trust, but also build a foundation for what's going to happen in the planning and the preparation. And then finally, that listen and learn. Um, I think a lot of times in leadership roles, we want to walk in and feel like we have the solutions or we have the answers in place so that people see us as being able to steer the ship, so to speak. I also, though, feel like you get more out of the process as a leader when you're willing to listen to the other people around you, what their concerns are, what their priorities are, what they've learned in other experiences, because they have a lot to offer us as leaders, not only by way of knowledge, but also in the way that then we turn around and lead and the way that we develop the infrastructure needed to be able to take on something like a full culture shift to technology first. So, what are some of those terms that we might use as a part of our common language? And the first one being technology first. I want to make sure everyone's on board with the original definition of what that means, because as we've seen, as states started using it, it's been very easy for it to evolve into some very abstract concepts that are all relevant. But the primary piece that you want to help folks understand is technology first means that we are thinking of the usage of technology and applying that usage before we start thinking about wrapping around direct supports and people in the same type of experiences. Technology first means we are considering the outcomes in the service plan and ensuring that technology has its own voice at the table, that we consider are there options or technological options or solutions that we can use. Technology first, though, does not mean it is an either or. And as you'll see at the bottom, when you have those conversations, helping people understand that technology can exist in conjunction with direct support. We would not expect there to be this either or, but a both and. We want that both and understanding of tech with people. Dignity of risk. This is one that Holly Reif and I have talked extensively about. There's a cartoon from a group out of Australia, and they have a gentleman sitting in a wheelchair, and he's got bubble wrap all around him, and somebody's pushing the wheelchair. That is how we often do with people with disabilities. We are so concerned about safety, and rightly so, that sometimes we create almost what we used to call a secondary handicapping or disabling condition. What the dignity of risk says is that every human being should have the opportunity not only to be successful, but also to make mistakes and learn from them. Making a mistake doesn't mean you're bad or you're wrong or you're incapable. Each one of us has that capacity to make mistakes. You know, I walk out the door of my house, I leave the door unlocked. I go outside to garden and I forgot to, and left the oven on. Nobody shows up at my door, though, and takes my oven away or takes my keys away and says I'm not capable. Dignity of risk is a key foundational tool that we need to consider as a part of this whole person-centered planning or person-centered thinking in combination with technology first. We want families, self-advocates, and other professionals to appreciate that technology first means we are offering that possibility for dignity of risk and choice. You probably already know a lot about person-centered thinking, but some of your staff may not. Some of the families and the self-advocates may not understand that person-centered means I get to have a say in what I want to do with my life. We are not going to be technology driven. And that's a concept that has come about with this tech first idea. Technology driven means that we have a tendency to choose the next best shiny thing. And we want to put it in the situation because, wow, this is great. It's a robot, you know, or wow, this smart speaker is going to provide so much access. But if we haven't been person-centered in our assessment and our planning, then we're not going to know that a robot isn't needed in this situation, or this person may not be able to articulate well enough to trigger a smart speaker or have a smart speaker understand her. So we want to make sure that we are basing everything or grounding it in person-centered thinking, not in a technology-driven way. You want to be aware of current terminology around what technologies are being used. So assistive technology is still being used in waiver language. That has evolved into another descriptor called enabling technology, which is really a smaller subset of assistive technology. Those are technologies that are developed to really support independence in the community, in home, and at work. So things like automatic door openers that can be triggered by voice, smart speakers, medication dispensers, things that create opportunity for self-determination. And then remote support, what does that mean? Being timely and relevant in your definition of that. Because remote support, boy, that's evolved just in the last 5 to 10 years. Remote support no longer has to mean the use of cameras. It no longer has to mean that somebody is sitting in front of a screen watching everything going on in a home. Because of smart sensors and the capacity for staff at a provider's location to respond, we no longer have to think about remote support being that individual, in a office somewhere watching closely and making sure people aren't making mistakes or getting hurt. Reallocation of responsibilities. One of the biggest concerns that I have or questions that I have from providers is, how do I talk to my direct support staff and reassure them they're not losing their jobs? And that's important. We're already stretched, aren't we? With the workforce crisis and keeping good staff. And so the terminology, when I started writing the SHIFT curriculum, the terminology that I came up with was reallocation of responsibilities, which just means as your job evolves and changes, regardless of technology, because our jobs always evolve and change, we end up with new responsibilities and we reallocate our time and energy to adapt to the new responsibilities and put those into place. It's no different with the technology. Once technology is a part of the service plan and may offset the need for direct support, then those individuals, that staff, then may be working with additional people, or maybe their responsibilities become responding to alerts from the technology rather than sitting on someone's couch 24/7. So they're not necessarily losing their jobs to technology. We're just evolving their job roles and reallocating their responsibilities. A lot of us in the disabilities world talk about needs. And if there is one word I could get rid of, it would be needs. Because needs has that deficit framing as opposed to asset framing, which is what we try to do in person-centered thinking. So rather than asking somebody or telling somebody this is what your needs are, or having a team meeting about and around the individual saying this is what the needs are, let's start asking the questions: what are your priorities for your life? What are your preferences and what are your concerns? And use that terminology and model it by using the same thing with the team members. What are our priorities, preferences, and concerns? Because that frames up a bigger picture of an individual than just using the term needs. And if I'm trying to be outcomes based and develop skills, then I need to know what somebody can do, not just what they need. And then finally, that idea of both and, which we talked about before. So making sure that your language is current, it's relevant, and that it's consistently used among everyone who's doing the communication. So how do we have the conversation? What does that format look like? I've come up with 4 basic considerations, And I think if you can cover these 4 basic considerations, both from the overall kind of a big picture perspective and then from a detailed perspective, then you are probably going to hit everything that's going to feel relevant to the people who are there listening and learning about what's next. So the first thing that you need to identify, both first generally, is who will be impacted. Letting the people know it's not just the self-advocate, it's going to be our staff, it's going to be the leadership. We're having to think about policies and procedures and programming. Families, understanding and receiving education on what all of this means. And then as you get into those detailed conversations with smaller groups of people, you need to adapt your language based on that group. So you may use some different ways to communicate with families than you would with self-advocates. Different ways to communicate with direct support than you would with supervisory or middle management staff. What will occur? So a lot of times, in an effort to be transparent, organizations will jump right in and start listing everything that's going to happen. And that gets to be a little overwhelming for a lot of people. So when you have those, big picture conversations, have a big picture timeline. It doesn't have to be every little detail, because not every little detail is going to mean something to the big picture conversation with a large group. But then as you get down into those smaller groups, what are the manageable details that people need to know? What do staff need to know? What do families need to know? What do self-advocates need to know? Are there community partners that will be a part of this process that need to be involved in this communication? And how much do they need to know so that they are prepared? When will it happen? From a general perspective, again, giving a large, an overall timeline. This is what we're going to be doing in March. By June, we want to have this accomplished, and by September, we want to have this accomplished. But those individual groups are going to need to know, what are the timelines with the baby steps for my responsibilities? So helping staff know, this is what we'll be working on in March. This is what we'll be moving to in April. And by May, when we're trying to meet this big goal, this is where you should be by that point. And then finally, how will it happen? So defining each stakeholder's role and responsibilities and how they will take part in that. When you have that general overall conversation or communication to a lot of people, you'll want to assure people that you know who's going to be doing what. So assuring families that our direct support staff will receive education, they will be supervised with coaching, and then they will be using the technology with your loved one. Helping the team members appreciate how other team members are supporting this process is going to be critical. So how do we get the conversations started? We begin with, I think having general conversations and at meetings is helpful. And I don't want to belittle that by any means. But I also know that when you're working with a variety of types of people, that having some creative ways to engage them so that they feel they're a part of that conversation is going to be helpful. One of the most important things that you can do in this process, whether you've started Tech First programming or you're headed in that direction, is to find several opportunities for it to show video stories. Vendors typically have them on their YouTube channels. State developmental disability agencies typically have a YouTube channel where they'll have success story video stories. Provider associations may on their website have videos. One I would recommend you go to is ARRM out of Minnesota. Those video stories can help people visually see as well as comprehend how this technology works and the impact it can make on, one person in that story or the two people in that story. Sometimes that's what, in particular, families, direct support, and self-advocates need to see in order to trust that this will be okay. So video stories are going to be very helpful in those initial conversations. I've worked with providers who have had open houses where they have literally technologies out on tables where people can come in and really get their hands on them, see how they work, have demonstrations, have apps on a tablet that people can get into and see how those work and provide support. Or some folks create a small demo apartment or a demo room where families, self-advocates, and staff can come through and learn about the technologies, see them in action, and even potentially practice using them there at that demo site. Providing formal and informal education. This is one conversation that SHIFT has been having on a national level with state agencies and Medicaid, is how can we start building in the capacity to support organizations accessing education prior to tech integration. I can't tell you how many times I have worked with providers or consulted to providers who have bought all of this great technology because the money is there for the technology, and yet they haven't spent time training the people to use it, and the technology either ends up on the shelf or the staff ends up frustrated and angry because they're being held accountable for something they don't know how to use. And the assumption that young people today will be able to do all technologies because they're more tech savvy than an older generation just isn't true necessarily when you think about all of the different smart home technologies out there. Med dispensers, no med dispenser is the same as the other one. You have to learn the nuances of the different technologies. So everyone should have that access to education. When states say we don't want to put, we're concerned about having assistive or enabling technology for independence because it could create unsafe situations, my response is, if you're educating folks just like you do with CPR or abuse neglect reporting, if you're educating folks on how to use the technologies, then you are greatly reducing that concern for safety. Because then people know what they're doing with it. They know how to use it effectively, and they know how to respond to it. Look to another provider who has some success stories, or invite another provider to come over and chat with your team or chat with families. Have family-to-family support. Even if you have to connect with a provider across the United States and ask them if they have a family member or self-advocate that could Zoom in on a meeting, that can play. That carries so much weight with the families that you support, with your staff, and with the self-advocates. So creating opportunity for them to connect with people who already have it in place or who are doing it successfully can really make a difference. I've seen providers who have had an opportunity to have a panel of people come in and sit down and chat, and have invited other providers in the area to come over and maybe have 4 or 5 organizations come together, open it up to families, staff, anyone who wants to attend, and listen to a panel talk about how technology has made an impact. And then finally, if you have state agency staff like Holly or Jason or other people that you want to have speak to your group, all you need to do is ask. Just email them and see if they can make a 30-minute time to Zoom in or come by, have those conversations with you. So actually, at this point, that's a lot of the content. What I want to do now is I would like to open it up for some just general discussion. Before we get into questions and answers, I'd like to ask you, whether you have integrated tech or not yet, I want you to think about what is one barrier that you've experienced or that you anticipate experiencing regarding that culture shift that's going to be required for tech integration. And how did or how could communication support a solution? So, is there anyone that feels comfortable throwing out there a barrier that you've experienced or that you anticipate experiencing because of moving in that culture shift of tech first? Okay, well, I will throw some out for you guys. So, I was a consultant in a project in the state of Tennessee that lasted for 3 years. And we started off with 4 provider organizations and built our way up to about 50 by the end of the project. Part of that opportunity was that they had a monthly webinar to check in with the consultants and talk about barriers and solutions. One of the biggest barriers that was brought to the table over the course of time was, how do we have these communications with families or guardians? How do we have the communication in a way that helps them understand and appreciate the value of technology? You know, how do we get them on board? How do we get their buy-in? And uh, most providers over the course of time came back to the idea that it all started with, how do we start the communications? You know, how do we open up that invitation? Probably it's going to need to be a one-on-one conversation, but also over time, including opportunities for general education, like in a newsletter or on our social media. We had one provider organization who started a Facebook page, and it was geared toward everything they were doing with technology, and highlighting, not only, it was kind of like that dignity of risk concept. They would highlight the successes, but they would also talk about the mistakes they had made and how the solutions, how they had remedied them. So they were honest and open about that. But that did seem to be a challenge. And so I'm wondering if anyone out there has experienced that same challenge of helping families get on board with technology, and what you might have done that could support that. Okay, then I'll go on to the next barrier. So one of the other barriers that providers have discussed is, how do we have those conversations with our staff so that they don't get concerned? Oh, there's a comment. I can't see that though because I'm got sharing my screen. Does someone mind to read that to me? Here we go.
Yeah, Cameron, I'll read it for you.
Thanks.
This is from Ginger. Residential providers are not necessarily willing to use tech, maybe because they don't understand how to use, or constant staffing changes cause training issues. How can we help them use it and be consistent to use down the road?
Sure, Ginger, that's a great question. You're right. I think residential providers, as well as providers, employment seems to be another challenge where we experience barriers regarding willingness. Um, and I think you're right. Education and training is a critical part of that. And so, how and where do we find those opportunities, especially when there is turnover? Um, so sometimes it just begins with a conversation or a program wide opportunity. There were times when a local managed care organization or support coordinator, case management organization would invite me in, and they would just have like an open house or an open meeting with residential providers, that somebody else's voice could come in and say, here's what you can do, here's how you can do it, here are the success opportunities and whatnot. So I know when they hear it from the same people all the time, they kind of it gets to be like that broken record thing where, they just tune it out. I will say that some of the video stories do have a big impact, can play a big role in helping providers starting to appreciate that it doesn't have to be scary and big, assuring them that you can start technology small. It doesn't have to be every person that you support, nor does it mean every staff person needs to be aware of how to use the technologies. Start small. Use something as simple as a Ring doorbell or a medication dispenser. It doesn't have to be a big time sensor system so that somebody can live all on their own 24/7. I've found that buy-in is more likely when you're willing to take the baby steps and do it the right way from the beginning than if you try to do something really sophisticated and include a lot of people and then it falls on its face. Nobody wants to then hear anything about tech after that. So start small, share success stories, have a tech champion. If with residential providers, sometimes the leadership are so overwhelmed or so tired that find somebody in that mid-level who's really excited about the opportunity and create that opportunity for them to be the tech champion. Have them invite people in to have some discussions, get people involved from the outside of the organization. The more voices they can hear, who can share experiences and lessons learned, I think the more willing they'll be to do that. I hope that's helpful. The second part of that question, because I was able to pull up the chat box, is the consistent use down the road. And you're right. Sustainability, not just trying it once or with a few people and then being done. I understand your point there. And that to me is where that takes a bigger commitment to education and that organization-wide culture shift. So until you have some buy-in through those baby steps, then something like consistency and sustainability they're not going to jump right into that part. They've got to have the buy-in first, be successful, and then move or evolve into that consistent use. Any other questions? So as we talk with direct support staff, I want to really highlight again two key points that I encourage provider leadership or supervisory leadership to hit as they talk to direct support staff. One is that idea of reallocating responsibility and give them examples just like I gave you, as a part of your job, you had to learn this. Not related to tech, just generically in their job. When their job has evolved at other times, how did they do that? Reassure them like, we offered you education, we did this, we did this, we did this, and now here you are. Well, it's no different with technology. We're going to offer you education, we're going to do this, this, and this, and then you'll be ready to help implement that. And then reminding them that it is a both and. It's not an either or. We want you to stay on board. We want you to be successful. And we want you to have what you need in order to successfully respond to technology, support people's technology and whatnot. That's going to be education. That may be we give you technology yourself. So you have a cell phone or a tablet so that you can respond to the individual or check in and see what's going on, in the data, the portal that comes with the technology. So making sure that they know they're going to be respected and receive the professional development they need to do their jobs adequately is key. And then I think for talking with, one thing that I've learned about talking with self-advocates is it can be, number one, very overwhelming and very abstract. And so having it in a way that you can show them some video stories, actually, see technology in action, go to someone else's home, go to a demo location, go to an assistive tech resource center, go to Best Buy, just look at things that are available. But the more concrete we can be, um, the more opportunity we have to really understand what their thoughts and preferences are on technologies. We just have to be willing to communicate about it in a way they can communicate about it. And then community partners, that one I think is a place where you have to be really proactive, especially people who, so a lot of times the emergency support system in the area isn't always aware that people with disabilities can live on their own. And so making sure that you're talking with, especially if you're in a small town, talking with the local fire department, EMS station in the neighborhood where you may have people living. And the reason why I suggest this is because we've had this happen a couple of times back when I worked at a technology company. There would be people living alone, in their own home with technology, and staff was off site. And if the technology alerts went off, the staff would come. So in one occasion, the smoke detector went off, and the people in the home knew that it would trigger the staff, but they'd also learned that when there's a fire or smoke, you call 911. So they called 911, and as you can imagine, the person on the other end guessed that this sounded like somebody with disabilities, and they sent fire EMS over to the home. They got there before the staff did, and there was a huge concern by the EMS and the fire people that people with disabilities were living alone. They called DSS. It got to be, it just escalated beyond what it needed to. And so we encourage people to think about who else in the community needs to know that we're doing this. What do the employers need to know? What do the bus drivers need to know? The transit authority need to know about people using tablets or navigation apps to get around the city. We need to help destigmatize the fact that people with disabilities can and should live in the community rather than can't or shouldn't, or they're not safe enough. And we can do that with communication, being open and honest and educational in the way we approach it, so that everyone in the community begins to appreciate that technology can be a natural support for people with disabilities just like it is for us. Why should we deny them the option of a self-locking door and a Ring doorbell so they can be safe and live at home by themselves all or part of the time when we do it every day? So asking those questions can be helpful too. I call that asking the good question, helping people think about, if it's good enough for me, why can't it be good enough for people with disabilities? So on that, I will pause and see if there are any other questions, either in the chat or if you want to come off mute. And I'm going to actually, put the contact information up for Shift. This is an online platform for accessible and affordable education around technology and integrating technology. Any other questions? Well, I really appreciate you coming out today. I know they have done a beautiful job of spreading out this Tech Fest over 3 Thursdays so that people could attend virtually and get to hear from a lot of folks. So thank you for coming to this session today. I hope it was helpful. And if you want to email me about anything, I'm going to put my email in the chat box right now. And thank you for your time today. You get to get out a few minutes early. Yay.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Cameron, and coming to speak with us. We really appreciate it.
Gladly.
Um, and just a reminder for everyone else, we have some upcoming the Tech Fest portion of the day, which is starting at 11:30, and that's a chance where you can visit with individual assistive technology providers and remote support providers in their own virtual rooms and kind of ask questions about their products and services. So you can get there by just going back out to the Technology Summit main page and clicking on the button labeled Tech Fest vendors, and you can go check those out. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks again, Cameron.
Yeah. And Shift will be one of those tech vendors at the Tech Summit. So Natalie will be in there, and she's glad to chat with you about anything education-wise. So yeah,
All right, great. All right, thank you. Have a great day.
y'all too. Take care.